Hello and welcome to my community. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. As always, thanks for joining us. It is perhaps fortuitous that Ronald Davis be the guest carrying this week's edition of My Community. For 38 years ago, in 1983, he regarded it as a paradise.
It's a paradise, this country that we live in. Oh, when we compare with other countries and how them people suffering, things could be worse. You must agree that we Bajans really live in the best country.
This week he is here with us. He will zero in on Blaze Hill, and we will learn about life in Blaze Hill many years ago. Take it over, Ronnie.
Let me start with Three Houses Spring, where the water that one would find in the spring actually flows from on top of a hill we call Mount Pleasant Hill, still in St. Philip. So it flows from Mount Pleasant Hill through to thickets, and then from thickets it will get it into the spring then, where over the years the youngsters really enjoyed going down there because, of course, we had a lot of fish and so on, and you guys would, as many fish as they would catch, tell the truth, more came back. And that spring didn't only service the youngsters and service people who would have had picnics down there and so on, but the water also flowed all the way up to Riverland and so on. And as a matter of fact, up to now, farmers are still using the water up in that area, which flows from all the way up Mount Pleasant Hill. Back then, opposite the spring, was all bush and grass and so on. And at the spring, the women used to go there to wash the clothes, because even though we had 1 or 2 standpipes, the spring had an adequate surplus amount of water. At the standpipe, you would have to wait until someone catch the water in a bucket and then wait in a line and that kind of thing. Whereas at the spring, the water spread out so wide that everybody can be washing the clothes at the same time, and we would spread the clothes out on the grass to as people would say, blow in the wind and dry. At that time, while you're waiting for your clothes to dry, you could hear the noise coming from Three Houses factory. And the factory was always obviously a buzz activity in the factory. Sometimes you look up just in time to see a man by the name of, we used to call him Mr. Beckles from Bladesdale number 3. In those days, he sold, we had the shave ice. This is long before the snow cone crack came along, in the 60s and so on. And he had the shave ice, and he would put some drink with it and so on and make it as tasty as ever. But I think people will most remember Mr. Beckles mostly for his a bread and two. And that is a salt bread with 2 fish cakes in it. And I tell you something, the majority of men who worked at the factory then, that was their breakfast, tea, their dinner, and everything, because the fish cakes taste so nice. Mr. Beckles, he really serviced the area, adequately. He was an icon as well around this area. Now, the road going down, though, in those days, to Three Houses Spring, was bad. And so, if your shoes lasted you for 3 months, you were good. Even when I was on my way to school at Mesquite School, that's where I attended private school, sometimes in a matter of weeks, your shoes in trouble. Fortunately now, as you would know, we now have a beautiful road coming up Three Houses Hill. And just on top of the hill is where you would find another icon. You would find a gentleman by the name of Mr. Addington Ford, who wrote several books. He actually wrote a book about St. Philip, covering all interesting spaces within St. Philip and so on. And a very good writer. Actually, he is the person who introduced me to the National Cultural Foundation, where I would have been there as cultural officer for music for maybe 20 years or so. And that leads me to remember people like Plastic Bag, who attended the St. Mark's Boys' School. And the Boys' School, really, because of the Boys' School back then, here on Three Houses Hill, but it also accommodated females as well. So it was boys and girls. And you left the St. Mark's Primary School and came over to the Boys' School, as you got older. Opposite the school, St. Mark's Primary School at this time, you'll find Bladesdale number 3, where one would find Miss Marcel Rudder Clark, who is popularly known on radio, and who is always there, of course, to give us valuable information. She knows maybe, I would say, 500,000 birthdays. and she's always well acquainted with things happening around the area and by extension, all over Barbados. So we have, she's still here with us, fortunately, and she always makes you smile and laugh and so on. I think it caused me to remember a lady by the name of Miss Dish. Mrs. Dish, she was a godsend to the community in that youngsters who found themselves, you know, unfortunately not having money to support themselves with clothes for school and so on and that kind of thing, Ms. Dish always came forward and from a monetary perspective, she always gave tremendously to the youngsters in the village, the parents and so on, helped support them. And she was, I would say, an icon in this area. In the 50s and 60s, we had one of Barbados' best barbers. We used to call him Granville. Never knew his surname, but we called him Granville. And back then, people said, well, look, you know, if you go to Granville, he could cut your hair with his eyes closed and not snip your ear. He was that good. On Sunday mornings, you would see people just packed around waiting to get a haircut. And right opposite Granville, I believe Miss Knights was his sister. There was a lady by the name of Dorothy Knights. And she sold some of the best fish cakes. Even though people complained that they did not have enough fish in them, they were still sweet. Nobody, I would say, since then, nobody really perfected that way of making fish cakes with less fish, but yet tasting so nice. Everybody enjoyed Dorothy's fish cakes, you know. We call her Miss Knights back then. That's what we knew you as Miss Knights, Dorothy Knights. So children on the way to St. Mark's Primary and Boys School will always stop in there to get the fish cakes and so on. Well, in 2015, we got the Resource Center, where we are currently sitting right now. The Resource Center was opened back then in 2015, and it has served us well since then, to be honest with you. Currently housing the St. Mark's Credit Union. Also, there's a dance group which performs here as well, and recently formed the Extreme Folk Group. They are doing all original folk songs. We even have one on the same Three Houses Spring.
Laughing till water run out the eye. All them things happening when we down by the spring. We talking, we ain't leaving. Love it down by Three Houses Spring, Three Houses Spring.
And they held a show here actually, which was packed out and did extremely well. And you know, people are looking forward for our next show. So hopefully, if COVID permitting, we would have another show here in the Resource Center. But one of the major buildings within the Blades Hill area would have to have been the Freddie Gittins School. Now this was a private school. It housed over 100 students. And people said that he was one of the, well, a great mathematician. He was very good, and actually the proof came out when the students attending his school, most of them would pass the exams all the time. Further up the road, you would get another educator, Mr. Elbert Burke. Strange enough, he couldn't hear very well, but everyone in the district wanted to send their children to him because, again, most of the students going to him to prepare for exams and so on, passed the exams. He was a very good tutor. He lived most of his life in, well, for the early part of his life, let me put it that way, in Guyana. Then he came back to Barbados, and that was his thing. And then, in the corner, we would have a big upstairs shop, which we call Dorothy Hinkson's shop. It currently has the name Hinkson's still written on it. She's passed away now. But she was another Miss Dish. But she went further. For us here in Blades Hill, she was a shop owner, she was a nurse, and a provider. If you had the slightest cut on your hand, foot, whatever, you could go to Mrs. Hinkson, and she would put something on it for you and fix you up. As the people say nowadays, she will fix you up, and in a matter of days, you're feeling great again. Parents who struggled in those days to adequately, you know, supply clothing and so on, school shoes and whatever for the students, would go to Mrs. Hinkson and just whisper in her ear. And that willing ear is, you know what I mean, she would always, at the end of the day, say, well, you don't have to bring the money now. You can you think this pants would fit him? You think this shirt would work? And she was very floral, let me put it that way. She loved her flowers. And she always came up with me and complained. But when last you put water to these plants, you don't see these plants drying up. The kind of thing, that was her thing. Trying to do some of these plants. And sometimes I would come outside and find some flowers on the steps, just to be planted. She was an extremely nice person within this area of Mrs. Hinkson. You had people coming from Bayfield, Thickets, College Savannah, all over to Hinkson's shop. That serviced a wide area. Palmers as well, which is in St. John. All the way down to Padmore Village and Church Village. People came from all over. Because back then too, we didn't have the kind of 6 rows that we have now, where we have you know, hardware stores. And so she filled that gap. On Saturday nights, we would leave Hinkson's shop and go to the corner, which would take us to Supers. And on the corner, we had a very big store there, which provided us with all we needed. And that shop belonged to Aline, Mr. Aline. I remember Mr. Aline's shop, which is where we congregated to, for the older guys, not only to fire rum, but to talk people's name. And you could always hear at the shop who scored the most runs last week and who's batting better than who and so on. And that was the kind of vibe that existed around that shop. Everybody knew that shop as Boot. So you would always hear you're going to Boot shop. And it was one of the best places that one could find relaxation, where you could really relax. And you would also hear who killed the pig yesterday morning in the village. And I think that Miss Brown, she sent out the meat costing more than last week. We had Mavis meat and it would taste better and everything. And that was an exciting place to be. Traveling further, you would also leave there on Saturday nights too, and you would go to the Fete in City Hall Casino. If you took that right turn there though by Boot Shop, that will take you to College Savannah. Though in St. John, that is where you would find the St. Mark's Church. Now the St. Mark's Church though, I would say 95% of persons attending that church came from Blades Hill, Bayfield, a few from St. Catherine's, and also Thickets. And I think more of us came from down here than actually from St. John. I remember St. Mark's well because it was also my church as well, and I would have attended many Sunday schools there. I remember sitting on the grave, on the tomb in the graveyard, you know. At first, though, we were kind of scared to go into the graveyard, but that is where we sat on Sunday evenings at 3 o'clock for our Sunday school meetings. That's where we met, you know. And one of the greatest things that came out of the church for me was when Father Fields, Reverend Stephen Fields, came to St. Mark's Church. That would have been somewhere around 1985. And why I remember it so well is because he came to me one Saturday morning and he said, "But Ronnie, I don't know what's happening, but we need to see more young people coming into the church." Honestly, my response was, we are not singing the hymns as lively as we should. Coming out of that, he said, "See what you can do for me. What we can do to really enhance the attendance in the church and so on." And I came up with something which was later referred to as folk mass, where we took the whole mass. And for example, instead of having the priest, Mr. Fields, say, "The Lord be with you," and you know we'll always respond, "and also with you, lift up your hearts," we lift them up to the Lord, that became, "The Lord be with you, and also with you, lift up your hearts." We lift them up to the Lord. And the whole mass was done. We had guitar in the church, cymbals and so on, a little bass and so on. And every third Sunday, we had then what was referred to then as folk mass. The bishop back then, he loved it as well because he thought it was more closer to home, obviously. In having that type of music, the tempo and so on was more, you know, West Indian, Barbadian, Caribbean, whatever you want to call it. And the church was packed every third Sunday. We also created a group which we call Anglicana. Anglicana did original songs as well as we took those hymns out of the hymn book and put an up-tempo groove to them as well. I remember Anglicana performing on the CBC's program, It Was Time to Sing, where I think it was Reverend Wiltshire was in charge at the time. He promoted that program back then. And we did well, and as a result of performing the songs in that style, you know, we were then invited to perform for many other churches. And we had a nice time. We enjoyed going out there. I mean, we sang lustily. But St. Mark's Church, there's so much up there, because the view from St. Mark's Church, for example, where if you go to eastward, you can see the lighthouse, East Point Lighthouse, and the sea surrounding. If you come back slightly north, there's Concept Bay. And then if you go to the west, you can see all the way down to Bath Beach, and then further down to the point right down there in St. Lucie. The view up there is fantastic. So much so that the same Anglicana group, we had what we call a churchyard concert. We thought, because we always look to do things different, you see. So I remember we borrowed a stage from Bailey School and planted it in the churchyard just in front of the bell tower, framed the bell tower with coconut branches and so on. And we said, for a change, we're going to take the pews outside in the churchyard. And no one had to leave the seats to get anything to eat or anything like this. We had the girls come around and they would make a note, write off the things that you want to have to drink and things like this. Take it down to the Roy Thompson's building, because that is also a kind of a community building built there for persons who want to have the meetings and so on. And so St. Mark's really had a lot of memories for us up there. Then if you took the road going across Fortescue, that would take you to the back road where a place we call Pilsga. Now Pilsga is a place with, of course, a lot of rock and so on, structured with rock and so on. But up there was an area for relaxation as well. And that is where we went to cut the sticks and so on to make our gutter perks and so on. Because back then too, in the 60s, right through 70s and a bit into the 80s, we were, I think, more creative than we are today, right? Obviously, we didn't have the cell phones to play with or to compete with. So we made gutter perks. We sat down up there and we made rollers. The roller where we would take a milk tot, cut it in half, push one end into the other, and that made a wheel. Two wheels at both ends of a piece of board onto a longer piece of stick. And that provided, that was our roller. Of course, if you look at it from a financial perspective, we were poor. So we didn't have the funds to purchase the plastic, you know, toys and so on. So we made our own. Actually, back here on Three Houses Hill, you will find a guy, we call him Lee Shot. And Lee Shot he was extremely good with his hands. And he would make the miniature trucks. We would cut the cane peelings and pack them on these trucks. And I mean, these trucks look real, you know. Cut the cane peelings and load them onto the truck, and that would be a truck taking the canes to the factory. We also had the gooseberry trees. They were plentiful. And not only the gooseberry trees, but we had the dunce tree as well. Now, the dunce tree reminds me of Miss Belgrave. She kept house for a man named Mr. Carter, who was a watchman. And I don't know how she did it, because when one thought she would have been in the house cooking, all of a sudden, if you're going to pick nuts from that tree, you'll hear a loud shout, and everybody would scamper, you know, because it's a strange thing. But back then, it was sad, because we would see the nuts hanging from the trees and looking so beautiful and so and to be eaten, ready to be eaten. And I always loved the ones that turned brown, you know, and that kind of thing. That was my thing. And you would stand and look at the tree. You would walk to the tree. right? Now, obviously, there isn't anything to make a noise, but because I guess it's a psychological thing, you found yourself tiptoeing in broad daylight, and you can see where you're going. Why are you tiptoeing? You don't want Miss Belgrove to know you're coming. And it is only when your hand was a few inches from that dunks, you were here, one on them, one on up there, left about here. Everybody would scamper. And that was a fun thing for us. We spent a lot of time in the gullies as well, because in the gullies, you know, where we found some honey. We had bees buzzing around and so on. That is where we made our lemonade, because somebody would, sometimes you would find like a mammy apple. I don't see many of those today, mammy apples. And the breadfruit will be down there as well. So you know we're going to roast some breadfruit when the time comes in the gully. This was just off Fortescue plantation there. And we had a great time in the gullies as well. We spent quite a bit of time down there, actually. As a matter of fact, our parents would be shouting and calling for us, but nobody ain't coming out of the gully. Don't care how low she called for we ain't coming out. And we would get some water, squeeze the lime inside there. You know, a little somebody would bring home and come back with what we call back then some brown sugar. And we make a little stir. We have a nice lemonade. Back then, the turnovers were popular too. So you dash down, but you stay in bookshop and get some turnovers and come back. So lemonade and thing. And if you didn't have a lime, you stuck with the sweet water. That's back, you know what I mean? And that was about it.
Kentucky is a paradise, this country that we live in. Oh, when we compare with other countries and how them people suffering.
It's a paradise. How that came about? I played with a band with Lloyd Nurse and those guys. And we went to another Caribbean island. And the guys, everybody went ahead of me around 3 o'clock in the morning when we got back to the house at which we were staying, right? Got back to the house there and everybody, we got back there around 3:30 in the morning time. And everybody went ahead and had the bath and everything, everybody. And I thought, well, I'll go and get mine now because I want to stay as long as I feel like. But if I first, I know the others waiting on me. So I go in last. And I go in there and I soap up, man, Jesus, and the water coming down and nice and thing. So I'm about to wash the soap off now. And I hear water stop. I wasn't conscious at the time that they had this tank on the roof where the water, they caught the water in that tank on top there. And when that tank is empty, you have to wait for a while before you refill again, before you can use it again. So there I was in a bath with all this soap all over me. I know it started to cake on, how uncomfortable, and you gotta get a towel now. And then, so after taking care of that, I went and I sat on the bed and they say, because back then, let's put it this way, we were flowing, right? And I said, but you know, if I was in Barbados, this ain't gonna happen, you know. This ain't gonna happen, man. I would have water running, I mean, like, so you say, you know something, Barbados is really a paradise, you know. And that is where I took my pen up and went and got some paper and started to write It's a Paradise. And when we got back over Barbados, I was almost through with it. My brother, Jerome Davis, who by the way is currently, well, he writes a lot of books. He writes for the schools and so on, and books on blade still and so on. But anyhow, when I got back here, he helped me finish some of the lines because he has always been my harsh and worst critic. I don't have to write anything wrong with Jerome at all. His response is always, what I thought sounded good, he is, you don't plan to sing that in the tent. You want to start again without saying nothing. So because I hurt my heart to have to start. But that's how It's a Paradise came about. And from time to time I made adjustments, you know, to make it a little more current. But I found that ever since performing it, As a matter of fact, it came in handy when we performed in Germany, in Hamburg, in Germany, because the lady who took us from the hotel took us there, and I got an opportunity then to tell them all about Barbados and how nice it was. That I had to do It's a Paradise 3 times, almost 4 times, because those who had visited the island before, they got an opportunity to show off to the rest of the crowd that they knew, yes, they knew about Oystins, and they knew about this place and the next place, and so I didn't have to tell them to wave their hand. You know, I would start to play the guitar and just start playing, and they were like, stop, 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 stop. And we stopped, and everybody turned around. 1, 2, 3, 4, Barbados! You know what I mean? I said, can I play the song now? Oh, yes, you may continue. And they went back to singing It's a Paradise. And one of the things that struck me, and this is something that is great about Barbados, our sunshine. I remember saying we were having breakfast around the table there, and this girl, she's about 7 years old, the lady's daughter, who is looking after us. She comes down the stairs just in time to hear Lloyd Nurse say, geez, on, bread boy, because at that time, out there cold, you know, when we're going to play at a venue and we get out of the van, we are running into the van, the thing. Anyhow, Lloyd Nurse said, but geez, on, if we were in Barbados, you know, I could walk down Oystins with my shirt off. Sun coming down nice and sweet. So the girl overhearing that, she came to the table and she said, did you say the sun shining? So Lloyd said, yes, the sun shines in Barbados all the time, every day. She said something which meant U-L-I-E. U-L-I-E. You know? And Lloyd said, no, it's the truth. Ask the other guys around the table. So all of us obviously chorused the same thing. Yes, if we were in Barbados, we could walk without a shirt now. She said, that ain't true. That ain't true. There's no place in the world where the sun shines every day. Believe it or not. And she ran and go upstairs and asked her mom. She said, the guys are lying to me. The guys are not telling the truth. She said, what is it? So she came downstairs with her. She said, that guy over there, he said that the sun shines in Barbados all the time. And her mother said, yes, it is true. She said, it made me smile. She said, Mom, you told us not to lie. Are you lying too? So, Mom, but then it took a while for us to convince her that there was a place named Barbados where the sun shines every day. And that spurred us on then in the upcoming performances then throughout Hamburg, wherever we go, to say, well, hey, y'all don't know that there's a place named Barbados where the sun is shining all the time. So in my introduction, when I'm making my introduction to the crowd, that is my first thing. Now, I know you've been asking over and over where we're from. Of course, we're from a beautiful place named Barbados, you know, and we go down the road like that. And if you want to see the sun shine every day, there's only one thing to do, and it doesn't cost much. Come to Barbados.
Things could be worse, you must agree that we Bajans really live in the best country.
Expressed sentiments that are still very relevant today. Barbados, Barbados, I come from. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. Thanks so much for joining us. Until next week at the same time, take good care of yourself and look out for the interests of your neighbors. Goodbye.